This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former legislator Connie Wilson, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, John Hood with the John Locke Foundation, and Daniel T. Blue III, chairman of the Wake County Democratic Party and political analyst. Yeah, I was telling the panelists before we got started with this show, with this edition, we are starting our 16th year on the air. We've got a good show for you, beginning by discussing Governor McCrory's decision not to call a special session of the legislature. We look at McCrory's 25-year transportation plan, and then we ponder why there hasn't been more outrage over innocent people being kept in prison. Let's get started. For weeks, groups have been begging Governor McCrory to call a special session to deal with unresolved economic development and job creation legislation, like the Jobs Development Investment Grants, film and historic preservation tax credits, and other proposals. Developers hinted there were several big projects that could require sums of money not currently budgeted. But Governor McCrory put all the rumors to rest in announcing he had no intention of calling a special session unless there was a specific project that demanded attention. He said it would be counterproductive and a waste of taxpayer money. Said McCrory, there was no agreement in place on issues already voted on, and after a lengthy session, they need a break, and frankly, I need a break from them. Connie Wilson, this was pretty blunt talk. Is it pretty well understood that the House and the Senate are not close to agreement on any of these economic development provisions?
Governor McCrory definitely called this one right. At the end of session, for the last several weeks, there were major battles over different incentive plans that were out there. The different components were stuffed into different bills. They were floating everywhere. It was hard to even figure out which bill had what.
Senate was hanging Christmas tree lights on House Bill 1224.
It was crazy. And really, everybody does need a break. And there was not agreement that could be reached. They do these little special sessions all the time. They happen if there's a huge project. Obviously, there probably are some projects out there because there was some walking around money that the Senate really wanted, about, I think, $20 million or something like that.
That's good walking around money.
That's great walking around money. But there's always that opportunity, and he was right not calling them back. They need to be campaigning right now.
Dana, it was fairly interesting. He announced this on a YouTube video. What do you think about that? Some people are saying he may have hurt himself with this video.
I'm not sure if the video itself hurt him. I have to agree with Connie that he made the right call. In Wake County, we were very tired of the General Assembly. I have to imagine that the rest of the state was a little tired as well. Whether that's on YouTube or broadcast television, it doesn't really matter.
John, don't you find it a little bit interesting that Democrats really rose up and criticized the governor for not wanting to spend more money on economic incentives for businesses?
Well, they believe that they can show that as some kind of blow to North Carolina's economic competitiveness, that it will cost jobs. It's not a lot of good evidence for that, and typically you don't have Republicans being, at least in the conventional wisdom, you don't have Republicans saying, let's not be cozy and do big favors for big business. The Democrats say, yes, we should do big favors for big business. This is not the typical dynamic that we see.
No, not at all.
But I think it was, again, I agree with my fellow panelists, I think it was wise not to call a special session when there is an agreement about what to do. And if there is a specific argument to be made about a specific policy, that's the time to make it. Don't just try to browbeat people into doing something they don't want to do.
Well, I think it was the right policy call. I don't think we need to come into session for these programs that are ill-defined. But it wasn't the Democrats that trumped up this evidence. It was Secretary of Commerce Sharon Decker, who said, we need a special session. We're going to run out of money at the end of October to fund crucial projects. She's a member of the McCrory administration. She's a chief economic development spokesperson. Let's just don't put this on the Democrats. The McCrory administration itself was saying this to everybody. And I think what this shows is, and the governor lobbied hard for these incentives at the end of the session. I think he still wants to do it, but he couldn't convince lawmakers of his own party, which raises the question about who's in charge.
Well, here's the thing I found interesting about all of this. The governor said if something should happen, that a big project comes along, we'll call a special session of the legislature to deal with it, similar to what has been done in past years. Time out. Isn't that's why we created these economic development partnerships to start off with, is because we were moving too slow, we weren't responsive enough to them? I mean, if we can call the special session and deal with it on that basis, John, why do we need this private partnership?
Presumably they're not going to bring in the legislature for a special session to negotiate $1 million incentive package or something. That's not what we're talking about. Are some gigantic projects where there might be gigantic incentive offers. That's something I do think the legislature should vote on. That's entirely appropriate because it amounts to a significant appropriation of state funds. Now, on the other hand, though I don't like incentives, if you're going to have a package that's available throughout the year, of course you don't need the legislature to come back in, because that is something the economic development partnership can act quickly on. But when you're talking about big money,
well, one of the arguments, though, is that Secretary Decker is saying that the existing, and I'm not saying I agree with her. She's saying the existing programs are running out of money. Not that we need to come in and give it to one project, but that we're literally running out of money.
The JDIG grants are supposed to run out of money in October.
I think that's what's interesting about this, and McCrory didn't address that in his YouTube statement.
Well, but he did, because he said it's not worth bringing them back together.
Well, he doesn't have the votes.
Well, it's not worth bringing them back together. That's leadership. He's working with their hand in
But he's already expressed strong interest for these programs. He's working like crazy. His own secretary said we need to do it. He just can't convince the members of his own party to do it.
But he's right. We all need a break. There's no question about it. And speaking of breaks, if you haven't visited the NC Spin website lately, you've been missing out on a lot of new content we add all during the week. Every day there are new perspective pieces and new videos from our panelists and other opinion makers in North Carolina. More print, more video, all on ncspin.com, NCSpin on Facebook, or tweets from @NCSpinTweets. NC Spin, the only place for balanced debate in the Old North State. We want to hear from you. After these messages, we're going to talk about the 25-year transportation plan.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
My name is Bernie Teal. Sunburst Farms has been in my family for over 35 years. Last year I had to do something I'd never done before. Destroy 10 acres of good squash. I wasn't able to find enough workers. The opportunity is there. American families are demanding locally grown vegetables, and I want to provide that to them. So please tell Congress that we need immigration reform now.
Your family physician supports Medicaid reform. That's good for North Carolina patients, providers, and taxpayers.
For over a year, we've worked with the Governor and the General Assembly on a plan for responsible Medicaid reform.
The Senate's proposed Medicaid changes are a departure from this plan. Changes that could lead to a decrease in the number of primary care physicians providing care in communities that need them the most.
The destruction of our state's medical home network, a network that prevents unnecessary hospital and emergency room visits,
and disregards the elderly, the blind, and disabled, and the health care they need. Care we're morally and legally obligated to provide.
Now is not the time to disregard the progress we've made. Now is the time for lawmakers to implement responsible Medicaid reform that protects and improves health care for all North Carolinians.
Visit rnchealthcare.com and tell your lawmaker to support responsible Medicaid reform.
We now return to NC Spin.
One of the platforms on which Pat McCrory, the candidate, ran was the need for a long-term transportation plan for North Carolina. After 20 months in office, Governor Pat McCrory barnstormed the state this week to tout his new 25-year plan called Mapping Our Future. The governor said he hoped to have the same impact President Eisenhower had when he devised the interstate highway system. At the heart of the problem and the heart of the plan is funding. McCrory hopes to convince the legislature and voters to approve a $1 billion road bond package to fund an additional 22 projects he says that in all total will generate 70,000 jobs. I want to start by asking all of our panelists, what do you think about the governor's 25-year plan? Dan, we'll start with you.
It's an interesting plan. One of the things that jumps out immediately to me is that you've got a large amount of money, much of it being borrowed on low interest rates, to fund shovel-ready jobs. And if that doesn't sound familiar to you, it sounds a lot like what the president was doing with the stimulus. So I'll be interested in seeing how it gets past the legislature and everyone else who's involved.
John Hood, your reaction to this?
No, it's the exact opposite of a short-term make-work job plan. It's something over 25 years. That's the whole idea, is that it's a carefully thought-out plan. Now, I don't agree with all aspects of it. I think too much of the money goes to rail, too much of the money goes to bike paths, too much of the money that comes from drivers of cars on highways is not being spent on highways. But borrowing money at this time at low interest rates does make a lot of sense. Of course, borrowing money is not a revenue source. It's a debt. You have to pay back with a revenue source. So, of course, the real debate is how you're going to pay for it. And I think some ideas that have been broached for decades need to be brought back into the debate. They're certainly not going to raise the gas tax. In fact, the governor seemed to suggest that part of the revenue deal might be to cut the gas tax to make the plan more palatable.
Chris, what do you think of the governor's plan?
Well, I think just like all plans that are this big, I think it's a mixed bag. I do appreciate, actually, that he paid some attention to mass transit and light rail and bicycle paths, the things that John doesn't like. I think Dan is onto something. I was told by this governor many times the government doesn't create jobs, and now he's bragging about creating 70,000, whether it's immediately or over 25 years. I do think the big battle is going to be over the financing, which is not a surprise. Not only the billion-dollar debt, we still have huge maintenance needs. We still need more highway funds outside this plan, and I'm not sure where we're going to get them.
Connie?
We did something almost exactly like this back in the mid-'90s, where we did a $950 million bond bill. It had to pass the General Assembly, had a vote of the people. It was a very contentious bill, just because when you start divvying up where the money's going to go, people really care about making sure that they have enough road money for their area. But it's smart because the cost of road construction keeps going up. The cost of right-of-way keeps going up. If you can finance now at low rates, lock in your costs at a lower rate than 10 or 15 years down the road, it's fiscally responsible.
Well, Dan, as has been mentioned before, the governor says we're going to need some new funding sources, but he didn't come forward with any proposals about what those new funding sources were going to be. Does that hurt him in trying to convince the voters about this plan?
It probably hurts him a bit, but all things considered, it's the same conversation that's going to come up every time you talk about something this size. You can look at the gas tax, you can look at bonds, you can look at toll roads. I mean, the variables may move around a little bit, but the basic options are the same ones that we debate.
It's interesting. I was going to say, go ahead. Well, I mean, one of the things I thought was interesting is that the governor did stay away from toll roads and HOV lanes and all those things. Those have become a lightning rod on the sort of with the Tea Party folks who have been attacking Tom Tillis and Paul Stam all over the place for their past support of toll roads. I don't think it's an accident that they weren't included.
But there are a lot of people that are saying they're disappointed. They think $1 billion, going back to Connie's point, we did $900 and some million back in the 90s. The needs are considerably greater now, and $1 billion is nowhere near enough.
Well, it's not enough for the whole plan. This is just the initial step of it.
But do we really think this is going to last 25? We've never had a plan that lasted 25 years.
A lot of our plans are, the Transportation Improvement Program was a 20-year program. Turned out, wasn't always planned that way. But look, there are other options. I'm not endorsing all of these or any of these necessarily, but they may come out with a sales tax proposal, like local option or something like that. Might be the car tax. You might go up on the car tax and down on the gas tax.
The vehicle miles traveled?
I think that vehicle miles traveled will be talked about, but it's difficult to get people to do. The toll road part is clearly part of the plan. It's already part of our plan. It will be. But I also think reducing some of the transfers of funds from the highway fund, particularly the highway patrol. If they were to share that cost with the general fund, that would free up some highway dollars.
Yeah,
of course, that would have a cost.
Two final questions. Number one, can he get this through the legislature, Connie and Dan? Can he get it through a vote of the people? Start with you.
Yes, he can definitely get it through the General Assembly. It's working with the leadership and the rank and file within the caucuses to make sure that he has the proper structure where the money is going to be going.
Dan, can he sell it to the public?
I think he can, but the more he gets into specifics, the tougher it's going to be. As has already been mentioned, people care very deeply about the roads in their community, and they may or may not get the allocation that they're betting on.
Well, I'm sure we're going to be following it as it goes through next year's legislature. After these messages, we're going to talk about 2 more wrongful convictions being released.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
The best part about being a member of a Touchstone Energy cooperative is that it's your Touchstone Energy cooperative. Learn more about the power of your co-op membership at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
2 more wrongfully convicted inmates were released after the Innocence Inquiry Commission discovered compelling evidence that they were convicted for a rape and murder they did not commit. Now, this commission was set up in 2006 after then Chief Justice I. Beverly Lake expressed concern that North Carolina's criminal justice system might be punishing innocent people. Since its establishment, the organization has helped 6 people gain freedom due to wrongful convictions. Chris, the governor and the legislative leaders responded by touting the Innocence Inquiry Commission, saying the legal process is working. Attorney General Roy Cooper had no public response, but you wrote a column saying this was a pathetic response to a startling injustice. And it was followed by a Washington Post columnist who said he was furious that innocent people have served 30 years for a crime they didn't commit. Why hasn't there been more outrage?
Well, I wish I knew. I mean, here's what's fascinating and startling about this case, that one of the men was on death row awaiting his execution for 30 years. His case was used as an example of why we need the death penalty by no less than Anthony Scalia, the Supreme Court Justice. His case was used as an attack ad by Republicans in 2010 about why we don't need the Racial Justice Act. His case was referred to in the debate about speeding up executions and why are we waiting so long, literally, to kill these people on death row in the recent legislative session. He was there for 30 years. DNA has proved that somebody else committed the crime. The prosecutor at the time, or the local police at the time, said, why don't you test this piece of evidence against a rapist who committed a similar act and who lives near this crime scene? It was never tested. All we had was a forced confession of 2 men who were mentally disabled. The guy thought, if I give a confession, I'll actually be able to go home. That's how confused he was. And I haven't heard one public official, from Roy Cooper or Pat McCrory or Tom Tillis or anybody, say, we need to figure out how in the world this can happen in North Carolina where we rob somebody, 2 men, of 30 years of their life. And one guy, it's almost torture, 30 years he thinks he's going to be executed, and he hears he's the worst criminal on the planet, and he didn't do it.
So, Connie, the question is this. Are these overturned convictions the result of new technologies, or are we saying that the prosecutors and law enforcement officials were deliberately withholding evidence that might free these people?
I wasn't there when it happened, so I can't make all those commitments, but I do think that in politics, there's usually some egregious situation that pops up that forces people to look harder at what's going on. And like has been said, the process is starting to work. This has popped up. I believe that this will be the catalyst for law enforcement and politicians to really make sure that all the processes are in place, that criminals are actually guilty and did the crime and not innocent people.
Beverly Lake at the time, John, said that this was being debated, said we had the best criminal justice system in the nation, but it wasn't perfect. Now, do we still think it's the best after 6 people have been released?
I don't have any way to evaluate his claim or any claim about any criminal justice system in the nation versus any. I mean, how many exonerations have there been in other states? What's the rate? This is
the only Innocence Inquiry Commission.
Yeah, but there's been plenty of exonerations in all 50 states. You don't have to have an Innocence Commission, though I'm in favor of it. I agree with Chris about the lack of attention to the case. But it is fair to point out that these typically are cases that involve police misconduct or prosecutorial misconduct or neglect that happened decades ago. It is a fair point to observe that police practice and the scrutiny on prosecutors is much different and better today than it was 30 years ago.
Dan, we had a group of conservatives this past week say, as a result of this, it's time to end the death penalty in North Carolina. What kind of momentum is that, and do you agree that it could happen?
I think it'll gain momentum, and my reason for that is you're talking about the criminal justice system. When you start to draw in some of the other incidents that are happening across the nation, there's a real question about the limits of authority, about the criminal justice system. Is it working? Is it doing what we expect it to do? When you end up with exonerations like this, it really starts to pull at the thread that connects us all. I mean, you end up saying that you are sending innocent people to jail for 30 years, not just for small crimes. They're labeled as rapists and murderers, and then it turns out that they're innocent. Somewhere along that continuum, if you don't have a moment that makes you pause in your thinking about the death penalty or the Racial Justice Act or any of these other initiatives that are going on, there's something wrong.
One of the good things about North Carolina, many states do not have compensation for victims, and these people are victims, and North Carolina does have that.
Very small, but we've got it.
I think is it $50,000 a year up to $700,000?
All right, we got to take a break. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
It is not okay to hit a woman.
Come on, man. Don't be that guy.
Walk away. Teach your children not to hit.
Grow up. Ask for help. Domestic violence isn't just an NFL story.
It's hidden in real life.
It's in our families.
It's where we work and where we worship.
Stopping domestic violence is up to
every single one of us.
If you're in it, please get help.
If you see it or suspect it, please report it.
Capital Broadcasting Company has been working with the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and its many partner agencies for more than a year to connect domestic violence victims and survivors to community help. The website enoughnc.org is a statewide, county-by-county resource. Please help us spread our message right now. Post enoughnc.org to your Facebook page. Tweet the website using the hashtag enoughnc. Ask your friends to share it.
We now return to NC Spin.
Now it's time for one of our favorite parts of the show, the part where we ask the panelists to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, we'll start with you.
Well, you may have heard it. I don't think enough people are actually talking about it. Connie said that the governor could work with legislative leaders on the transportation issue. It's going to be very difficult for him to work with the Senate leaders. Senator Phil Berger, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, said this past week that he was upset at the governor's comments about the Coal Ash Commission and said the governor apparently didn't want to set up an independent commission between him and his former employer, implying that McCrory was still doing the bidding of Duke Energy, which is what McCrory's political opponents say. So if you don't think the tension is still very high between the governor and the Senate leadership, I thought that was a startling example of there's a lot of fences still to mend over there.
Connie, tell us something we don't know.
We've been talking about economic development early in the program. There was a bill that went through. Senator Behringer and Senator Rucher worked on it, along with Senator Clodfelter early on, so it had bipartisan support on streamlining the business court and making it easier to incorporate in North Carolina to help with economic development. It's one of the unheard bills that are very important to North Carolina's economy.
All right. Dan Blue, tell us something we don't know.
There's an election coming up, in case you haven't been bombarded with the ads yet. I know.
Really?
The interesting thing is to watch all of the surrogates start to come through town. I know that Governor Christie was here on the eastern part of the state, and I know that there are also many more people coming in. It just shows you how important North Carolina is going to be in 2016 and the amount of attention that's on the 2014 election.
Are they really making any significant differences? I mean, does Chris Christie coming to Wilmington, North Carolina change a lot of voters?
I think it excites a lot of voters. I don't know that it changes their opinion of the races or gets them more energized about voting.
John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, the oldest Revolutionary War drama in the country is Horn in the West. It's over 60 years running in Boone, North Carolina, the outdoor drama, and it's in trouble. It barely completed its season this summer. The town of Boone has basically revoked its license to operate.
Wow. There
are maintenance problems. There's blame to go around, but if anybody cares about this show or about outdoor drama or the arts in North Carolina, this is not a case where I think state government should swoop in and bail out a local government or a local project, but people ought to open up their wallets and be interested in this program and make it survive for another 60 years.
The symphonic outdoor dramas that you're talking about actually originated, for all intents and purposes, in North Carolina with the Lost Colony, did it not?
Well, Lost Colony is the longer running show, but the Horn in the West is the only one that's or the first one that was dedicated to a Revolutionary War story, and an important one for North Carolina's history. Lots of actors have been through that, just as they've been through the Lost Colony drama, and it's something that the town of Boone and supporters of the theater ought to work together and fix.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read our column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.